Hello and welcome to today's webinar, What's Your Sustainability Game Plan? My name is Felicia Asiedu and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Cvent Europe. And I'm really excited, as always, to be joining you for today's webinar because today is about one of those topics very close to my heart, which is sustainability. We've done a few of those now, but today's webinar is a little bit different because we're really going to be getting into that game plan and the action of what you can do with regards to your sustainability goals. One piece of housekeeping I'd like to give you is please do use the chat to talk to each other. But if you want to ask us questions, please use the Q&A, which is two separate buttons, and you might see them on the one side of your screen. And if you're on your mobile phone, it's down at the bottom. I always know that one. But yeah, please do feel free to jump in there. I'll jump in there too, and we'll get your questions answered all throughout today's webinar. You do not have to wait to the end. And I'm not doing this by myself because I'd never like to do a webinar by myself. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Chris Justice, who's going to introduce herself to you now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Justice. I'm the Senior Manager for Enterprise Customer Success here at Cvent. I'm based out of Frankfurt. And I am here today because I have a portfolio of clients primarily based out of Europe, but with a global footprint as well, who are all wanting to talk about sustainability. And so we've had a lot of opportunities to have that conversation, both at small scale and at large scale. And I'm ready to share some of those best practices and ideas with you all.
Awesome. Nice to have you here, Chris. So we're going to get right into this, and we're going to just start looking, first of all, at what are we talking about? It might seem really obvious, but for some people, sustainability is a little bit of a jumbled up mess of stuff that they need to do something about, but they're not entirely sure where to begin. What exactly are we talking about? So we thought we'd start just by clearing that up and looking at these three kind of pillars, main pillars of sustainability. And as it says here, it's about society, economy, and environmental. And those all kind of come together just to form a real good vision for what we're trying to do in our world and in our organizations. But I know, Chris, when we've spoken about this, you're like, I love seeing this because it gives you all of the cross sections that actually we need to be focused on. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about sustainability, most of us are thinking about preserving our natural environment. And of course, that makes a lot of sense. But there are also other pieces that connect to that, and we see that in this diagram here. So one of them is that one of the things we've noticed for sure is that if an organization is focused on sustainability, chances are very high that they also are invested in diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. And that's part of promoting a healthy and inclusive society. So there tends to be some overlap, especially in planning meetings, to make sure that they are both sustainable and inclusive. And some of those things can be achieved at the same time. And then the other is supporting a thriving economy. And here it's actually the move to go local. So one of the things that's key is part of an overarching sustainability initiative is to make sure we're reducing that footprint. Huge footprint is travel of any kind, of people, of materials, and of food. So supporting that thriving local economy is a really big part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, at lots of the conferences and shows we're going to, these are big topics. So it's really great that we're able to talk about that. I am going to be honest with you. I know one area that people really dig into when they think about sustainability is they often think environmental, and that does take over a lot of the initiatives that people are thinking about. But in some ways, maybe it is one of the things that people feel like they can act on quicker because they know that by doing something to maybe reduce something somewhere, they can have an impact, and the other things might seem like big beasts. So that is what we're going to focus a lot of our discussion on today, and we know it's a big area. And we know that people are thinking about these principles of sustainability. And one of the big reasons why I've put this up here from the Event Industry Council is the number one thing above those things is actually about taking that shared responsibility for implementing and then communicating the sustainability practices. And I think the communication of those things, of the goals, of the challenges, of what we're doing, super important in terms of bringing all the stakeholders on board. So I put that out there because just talking about it, obviously not greenwashing, but talking about it is very important. Wouldn't you agree, Chris?
I would absolutely. And the great thing about sustainability is that's something a lot of people can get behind. So the more you communicate about it, the more champions you have, both inside the organization and externally.
Yeah, definitely. And I put our big hairy goal, I like to call it that. Our big hairy goal is here. We are part of the Vista, companies, and we have made a pledge as part of Vista to be net zero by 2050 and across the whole portfolio. I mean, we're not Vista, we're just one of the companies, but we are absolutely supporting and championing this across our business, not just with our events, but across our whole organization. And it's not the kind of thing you can do overnight. And I actually think that's quite reassuring because, setting these long-term goals, we know it's something that we need to strive towards, but it's great to have that sort of distance goal to get to, almost like running that marathon. You can't do it overnight. You have to do your, couch to 5K first. And that's what we're going to kind of hopefully give some tips on. How do you get off the couch? How do you even begin with this? So, in order to do that, we are saying you need to start with a plan, then track, then act, and then report. So, we're going to start in that first key area, the plan. To have that big, hairy goal, you need to understand, well, what are my goals right now? How can I get to that if I need to sort of start setting some goals today?
Yeah, this is kind of key to making sure that it doesn't feel overwhelming. Just like you said, Felicia, the big goal, big hairy goal of reducing emissions that much by 2050, that's a big deal. But there's a lot that has to happen before we ever reach that goal. And so in terms of what we can think about it, we can think about it in 3 steps. So the first is actually you need to know your current state. And that can be your first goal. That's a great goal to set, essentially to say, for a specific meeting like my flagship event, where I know for sure that I have a pretty big carbon footprint, I'd like to get an understanding of my current state, or for more of my meetings or a portion of my meetings, I need to know what my current state is. That would be goal number 1, because you need that in order to make decisions and to understand what's going to have the biggest impact when you try to reduce those emissions. The second goal is actually about reducing emissions, but relative to yourself. And in terms of saying, now I know what it was in 2022, for example, for my flagship event or for my total events program. And I'd like to reduce that relative to myself year over year by X%, for example. And that's a way for you to sort of measure against yourself to be able to see success, because benchmarking is great, but it's very difficult to apply in the same way that it is possible to apply, goals relative to your own previous performance. And then the final step is obviously achieving net zero. That's the gold standard. That's what we would like to all achieve. But without doing steps 1 and 2, you're very unlikely to get there, simply because you do need to do the work. And by doing number 1 and number 2 in those goals, you will have a better understanding of what will get you to number 3, which is net zero.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, on a personal front, I'm out here, trying to run Cvent Connect Europe, which is coming up in October. And one of the things that we're doing is working with a partner to start, measuring and tracking our current emission state. And I'm not going to lie, a lot of the planning team were like, but what if it's bad? And I said, well, so be it. It's bad. You kind of have to know that it's bad in order to start making improvements. And I would sort of advise, if anyone's, listening or watching today and worried about, well, what if I do it? I don't think I've done enough. Chances are you're probably already doing some stuff, let's be honest. And you just need to know what that is and what that's going to look like for the future. So don't be scared, would be my piece of advice. I'm certainly going into it head on and just going to get the results and see what we can do for next year. Awesome. So as we've said, start with that plan. Does your company even have a sustainability policy or mandate in place? And then start looking down from your company to your program goals, looking at your meetings program, your events program, and bring it right down into the objectives, your KPIs, that you can then look at and measure against and set that plan in advance for your goals. And then start to look at things like your vendors, your partners, your suppliers, and really bring that all the way down the funnel. And another piece of advice I'd give here is maybe your company doesn't have a sustainability policy or a mandate or goals. That doesn't mean you can't start anywhere along this sort of plan and kind of say, well, maybe my company doesn't have it, but I will have it in my department or at my program level or for my single event even. It might just be one event and you want to set something for that one event, maybe like you said, your flagship event, and just go with that, or one type of event, one format. All of my in-person events, I need to do something about that. That's absolutely fine. But you can start anywhere along here and just start to set a plan and give yourself some targets to measure against. And I know, and Chris, we were talking about this, giving these measurable, actionable targets for your organization.
That's right. I think this diagram is really eye-opening. So a lot of us do, I think, have that feeling. I certainly talk to clients who feel like, oh, I'm a little bit behind. I should already be doing things. Well, you have to start somewhere, sometime. And this is a great example of that. So about 55% of organizations have company-wide carbon emissions reduction targets. That means there's a pretty large percentage that do not. So they're definitely pretty far behind as well. About 23% have a target for business travel, which is particularly interesting because, of course, business travel is a huge carbon footprint for any organization. So even those 55% who have those targets, they're going to have to tackle business travel in order to get to those reduction targets. And then if we go down even further, only 9% have a target for company hosted meetings and events. And here's where I see a tremendous opportunity for everybody on this call. That means that there is a lot of green space for many, many of you to get proactive about that, because in order for those 55% and hopefully eventually 100% of organizations to hit their targets, they'll eventually come knocking on your door asking what you'll be doing in the meetings and events department. And what an opportunity to go be proactive and knock on their door to say, I think we can help.
Absolutely. I love that. Upwards management. So once you've set that plan, you need to start tracking against that. And I saw a question come in just around, how are we tracking? What are we doing? And you'll see that come up just now. So we're looking at this in two sort of ways, tracking against your meetings and events program in terms of, okay, what are we doing? What's happening? And then tracking the actual carbon emissions of that. And so on the side of what you should be doing with Cvent, you should absolutely be doing that first part, tracking the behavior of the meetings that are being planned for, booked, and executed, the strategic sort of vision and view of what are we going to do across a whole year, what are we going to do with a particular format or program, and then gathering that data back of, did we do that, and did they come? We thought it was 1,000 attendees, maybe it was 500, maybe it was 1,500, just trying to get into the data of what you're actually doing across your program. But then on the other side of that, you do need to be tracking the carbon emissions of those big hitters, travel, food, all of those things. And only a qualified system can help you to do that. And we know that there are people out there like Isla, like Event Decision, and like Sam. And actually, for Cvent Connect Europe, as I mentioned, and to answer your question, I know you asked, we are working and partnering with Event Decision this time to just track that single event, because we know that's a big one for us in Europe. And so they're going to do a lot of the legwork. But with apps like Sam, you can put the data in yourself or send it out to your attendees. And then Isla, big beast of a thing to do, because you have to really take the time. You have to know that this is definitely in our goals and it's something we're all committed to, communicated it out to your stakeholders, and we are going to take the time to do this. And that's when you engage with a company like Isla, who are running Trace, and that's when you really put all the time and effort in, because you have to do a lot of the legwork, but it is with a lot of benchmarked data, so it's really worth doing at some point.
One thing for us to remember is that Cvent is not a carbon emissions tracking calculating software, and we don't claim to be. And a carbon emissions tracking software is not an event planning software. So we recognize the fact that Cvent is really there for the meeting planners to do the job that they need to do. But in doing that, the platform provides a tremendous amount of tracking and information in a centralized place that will be absolutely critical for you to then track your carbon emissions. The other thing that's really great to think about is that we consider Cvent to be part of an ecosystem, and pun intended a little bit on that, but essentially Cvent isn't a standalone platform. We have an open API that can be used in order to send data from Cvent over to other systems. And for smaller organizations, it's probably not necessary. The return on investment wouldn't be high enough. However, for larger organizations that are doing a significant number of meetings and tracking that data in Cvent, obviously the payoff there is pretty significant in terms of sending that data in an automated way over to another system in order to track those carbon emissions. But as you're thinking about how you're using these different systems, you would want to think about Cvent as being a place where you are tracking information and you are driving behavior. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then the carbon emissions tracking software, obviously, where you are tracking the information for individual meetings and ideally, ultimately, your total events program as well, and starting to get much better insight into where you can move the needle.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm seeing some of those comments coming in with people saying, their organization, I can see here, I think it was Anna, said that her previous company, didn't have those goals at the organizational level. So it was really driven from the events team, which is really cool. And it's nice to see that, you can be empowered and take measures into your own hands, literally, and start measuring within your department. So it's great to see that people are doing that. So within that, this is where we're starting to talk about, the intake of, what's happening. And you can do that using meeting request forms with Cvent, and just starting to look at, what formats, how many of these things that we're doing are virtual, how many are in person, how many are hybrid, and what measures is the meeting planner, you all out there, putting into place in order to commit. And by that, we kind of mean, are you setting maybe some limitations on how many of these things you can do, how many in-person events do we want to do, and just starting to put that into place within your systems, so that you can start to track what you're actually doing within your meetings program.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracking is a key part of it, to make sure that you have the full picture of where you're going. One interesting thing that we're seeing develop as well, is actually companies and sometimes meetings departments are being given not just fiscal budgets, but carbon budgets, which means that you really do need to be staying on top of where you are in your carbon budget throughout the year as well. And tracking is an absolutely key part of that.
Yeah. And as you see here, we're talking about, not just tracking the intake, but also tracking your spend, how much of your spend, whether it's carbon or financial, is going to sustainable vendors and sustainable venues. And you can just start to do that kind of tracking within Cvent. And tracking, your carbon offset purchases, your sustainable purchases, and really just starting to look at all of that data as a whole. And like I say, it can be a single event, it can be a group. We don't have to always think about, well, I have 100 events, and of the 150 of them, but then you might do. And one of the things we were talking about earlier is, what is an event? We've had that conversation over the last few years. Is a webinar an event? Probably now, yes, actually. It's a date and time where you've all turned up, and we've decided not to do this in person. We could do this in person in 5 different countries, in 10 different cities. But this is the kind of thing that we are now starting to attribute to. Well, webinars are part of the events, our meetings. So really getting down to or to grips with what is going on here. What does my program look like?
Yeah, one of the things that you got to keep in mind is money talks, right? And that's certainly true in the business world. And we want to make sure that we're sending our money and spending it on places where we can make a real difference.
Yeah, and like we're saying, that single view can be done in this centralized, single system. And that makes it easier for you to look at, to take the intake, to track, to report on, in all the different areas. And I know, Chris, this is a particular side, so I love this view, just because it shows, how much you can pull it all together, but also integrate with your other systems.
Yeah, absolutely. You can integrate it, but even the system itself, so the platform allows you to go through the entire journey of the meeting. And we've talked in the past, if you've attended other webinars, we've talked about the attendee journey, we've talked about the meeting life cycle. Well, there's also a sustainability life cycle, or a sustainability journey with your meetings. And this is what this is intended to illustrate, is that there are multiple points in time in a meeting planning life cycle where you can make sustainability decisions, and you can involve others, like we said, with attendees to have them champion your goals as well.
Yeah, indeed. Cool. So now we've talked about your tracking, we're getting into the meat of it. And really, what we're hoping to give you are some real actionable tips that you can utilize and figure out, well, what do I do? So you've seen this slide before, but before it said track. And now we're talking about, well, you've got that data. How can I act on it? And the first thing we've put here is that you can implement approval processes for your in-person meetings with travel. And you can start to really limit, if you want to, how many of these meetings people can have across the year. And you can send guidance out to your meeting bookers if you have larger teams or just people that you'd like to keep informed. Remember, we spoke about communication earlier. And just communicating out, we're recommending you do this, and we're limiting this, and we're going to start measuring that. So you might like to consider, and just really keeping that top of mind for all of the people in your teams. Because when you do that, there's this kind of thing that knocks on. If you had someone saying, hey, you should recycle, hey, you should think about reducing, you might start to actually do it. And so it's really great to have systems and tools, and we all use technology these days to give us those reminders. So great that you can do it with your meetings programs as well. Chris, would you add anything to that?
Absolutely. So there's an opportunity here to drive that behavior in an automated way. Imagine if you had to, for example, like I said, share an email every single time that said, "Oh, I see you booked a meeting. Let me send you some guidance." That is not actually sustainable in a different sense of the word. Instead, you can use a system like ours in order to make sure that that's actually happening, that the guidance is being shared based on certain criteria, for example, like only those doing live meetings, only those doing live meetings above a certain number, et cetera, of attendees, for example, and a meetings approval process. It's so interesting because for those of you on the call who are familiar with strategic meetings management, approvals of meetings and really controlling spend was the main driver of what was implemented ultimately. But now we actually have a new driver, and that is around making sure that we're making smart decisions as organizations around sustainable meetings. And a part of that is keeping track of what we're approving and saying, yes, this is a meeting that makes sense to have live, and there's a good reason for that.
Yeah. And then also, like we said, using that centralized sourcing system, and Cvent has the Cvent Supply Network where you can go in and find sustainable venues. I do see a question come in, and I thought it would be a good time to address that. And Chris, maybe you can help us to do that too. It says, does Cvent have any plans to categorize sustainable suppliers? And I thought, just as we're on this slide, we might just
I love that question, and I certainly understand your struggle with trying to get venues to answer certain questions around sustainability. Some of the venues obviously are far more equipped to do that than others. There is actually something that you can do right now, and that is that we do have the eco-friendly tag in the Cvent Supplier Network, and you can search in the Cvent Supplier Network for venues that are tagged as eco-friendly. In our system. And you might be saying to yourself, well, what does eco-friendly actually mean? So the answer to that is, now it's a worldwide system. So there's no single global way of measuring what it means to be sort of environmentally friendly across the world. But there are certainly multiple certifying organizations that we would consider to be something that we would recognize as being a valid certification. So the way that we do that, for those who are wondering, is that when an organization asks us to be tagged as eco-friendly, we have them send us the certification that they're under in order to validate that it's something that we would consider acceptable and common use, so that we validated that they in fact do have certification of a kind. And then in addition to that, we've actually made it possible to upload, for the organizations to upload their certifications to the Cvent Supplier Network, so you can view those yourself. Now that is on the venues themselves to do that uploading process. We've of course reviewed it, like I said, before we added that tag, but them uploading it is another step. But that's something to definitely keep an eye out for, is as you're using the Cvent Supplier Network, using that. The great thing about it too is it's reportable. We keep talking about reporting and making sure we're tracking. Well, if you are awarding the venues that are have that eco-friendly tag, or even just sending RFPs, just kind of to start the process, you can report on how often you've sourced to an eco-friendly hotel and awarded business to one as well.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. It's something I've been driving my team to do. We do quite an array of different events across the year. And I'm now just asking the question every time, is that venue sustainable? Are we sourcing, at least, like we say here, drive behavior, have an RFP policy that requires planners to send to at least one venue with sustainable category. And I've asked for a lot more than one, I must say. So I think I'm driving my team crazy, but I think it's worth it. And I think, being able to drive that kind of behavior within the system is really great.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple more things here. This is my favorite slide. There's so much to talk about, but there's a few other things that anyone can do. So one of them is, if you've used the Maps feature, or if you haven't used the Maps feature, use the Maps feature, because of course it's going to give you a sense of where the hotel is located, but think about it in terms of walkability and accessibility. So are those hotels or the venues that you're choosing in a particular organization, in a particular city, are they close to public transportation, which means you can really push your attendees to use that? Are they in walkable areas that give you a choice of restaurants, and your attendees a choice of restaurants to go to and other activities as well? Those are things that you can use the Cvent Supplier Network for. Reducing your own site visits before the event even takes place, thinking through that by using the 3D floor plans. We do have a Cvent event diagramming is an offering that we have, but we've deeply integrated it with the Cvent supplier network so that you can see the floor plans with no additional costs or anything like that of those venues that have uploaded those, and actually tour them and so on without having to go directly to the venue. Um, and then even just, you know, changing your search patterns for the organization as a whole to bring up those sustainable supplier categories to the top of the search to make sure that they're right in front above others. So of course you can talk with your account team about more details about each of these, but really exciting stuff that you can do with sourcing. And hey, your venue partner is one of the biggest influencers of your overall carbon emissions. A lot is happening there. People are meeting there, they're sleeping there, they're eating there. You definitely want to be thinking about sourcing.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And I even love the fact that with the diagramming, you know, you want to be able to show your other stakeholders within your business without, you know, one person normally goes to the venue. Now you can show your other stakeholders, hey, look, this is what we're planning to do. This is how we're planning to space people out, you know, and just think about people's social interactions as well within the venue. So you're not just looking at, you know, the green element of sustainability, but you're looking at other bits and pieces, health and safety, and you know the social aspects of things as well. And you can plan, you know, where people are going to sit, you know, down to that level of detail, and then show your stakeholders. So it's really, really a great tool. Again, I use it all the time. Love using Cvent software just because I can. So here we're looking at that attendee management, just like we're talking about. You know, what about your attendees? And you can absolutely partner with your attendees to help meet your sustainability goals. And I know there have been questions around, well, is this my responsibility to think about how my attendees are getting there, or is it their responsibility? And actually, it's a little bit of both. And if you utilize those tools like the maps, you're helping your attendees to think about, you know, how they can get to your venue without using planes, and how they can easily get there. And you can send that information out to them as well and share, you know, routes, the best routes, the most sustainable routes to your venue. And also think about, you know, can you offer them the chance to offset their carbon? And I know if you left that to individuals as an attendee, it's probably not something your attendees will be thinking about just upfront, but you might need to give them that information to say, here is an opportunity for you to do that. Um, Further down here, we're saying, you know, highlight what you're doing with your sustainability practices. Talking about it, as I keep saying during this webinar, will encourage and inspire other people to also take action as well. And you have a big impact. If you think about the number of people that turn up to your events, that's all those people you're influencing all at the same time to think about their own sustainability practices. So definitely communicate. Go virtual where you can. You know, like we said, think about how many of those meetings you're doing, how many people are turning up, where are they coming from? And if you've looked at all of that and have assessed it and thought, you know what, this meeting might be better virtual, we now know that we can successfully do that because of the couple of years that we've just had. And we can see that actually the communication you can have through virtual meetings is in some ways really great, especially when you're sharing educational information and it's less about the networking on site. And finally, here, food waste. It is one of the biggest. I know, Chris, earlier you was talking about the three biggest offenders when it comes to thinking about green sustainability. Tell our audience, what are the top three?
It is travel. That's number one by far. Accommodations and everything that happens in the venue, and food waste, and the travel of food. So emissions related to food, if you're bringing something from abroad, for example, or your supply chain is doing that, that's a huge deal too. So these are really key. One of the things that I want to have you guys think about too is it's not just about, oh, should I put this on my attendees, or how much should I involve my attendees? Your attendees may need you to do this on their behalf because they're organizations that are setting sustainability goals for themselves. They're going to be looking at business travel, for example, as how much of our carbon emissions are we using for this particular trip? And being able to say, you know what, this is a low carbon footprint meeting, and here's why. We've done ground transportation planning, we are using local food, we are recycling, you will not be, traveling in by taxi and so on, and we're offering carbon offset purchases as well to our attendees. That might actually be a consideration for attendees on whether or not they come to your meeting eventually. Sure. Is it happening broadly now? No, but I can guarantee you that it will, especially as those by 2030, by 2045, by 2050 targets get closer and closer. They're going to be taking a much closer look at this as well. So it's a good time to get ahead of it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I was so intrigued to hear about, if you're sharing this with your attendees as well, not just about travel, but about the food. One of our colleagues was talking about an event recently where they donated the food to, I think it was a pig farm. And, the waste is not waste because it's useful again, and you're actually reusing, I guess, the food or recycling, depending on which area you want to pigeonhole it into, but giving that food to animals to eat, which goes around, in the ecosystem, of ensuring that we're not wasting that food, we're giving it to a good cause. And I think you mentioned another one. What was it?
Composting. So
Yeah,
composting is a piece of it as well. And one thing I want to encourage all the meeting planners out there to think about too is there's nothing more terrifying to a meeting planner than running out of food. But it may be time to think about that as well, because avoiding food waste is about trying to get much more accurate in terms of what food might be needed. And again, this is about involving your attendees. What are you doing and why? And what are the benefits of that? So it is one of those top 3 items to really think through as you're trying to figure out where you're going to make the biggest impact in your meetings program.
yeah. And finally, here, this slide, I think, is one of those almost no-brainers. So, in some ways, I was like, do we share this? Because paperless seems to be the thing that people mostly go to. They lean on, hey, we've gone paperless. It's one of the sort of top things I hear where people say, we're not printing. But at the same time, it's worth mentioning because I've also heard people say, can we just pre-print all of those badges and leave them out on the table? And, when people come, they'll find their name and then it'll be really quick and I can get all of my attendees into the event really quickly. And actually, that's a waste because if all those people don't turn up, suddenly you've got wastage that you didn't really need. And also, we've spoken about this when we did GDPR like 3 years ago. It's probably not a good idea to pre-print everyone's names and have all of their details out on the table just for anyone to peruse. It's probably a better idea just to have them when they turn up, you print their badges. And with Cvent, the badge printing is so quick. Even full color printing is very speedy. So I wouldn't worry about pre-printing. If you're still doing it, maybe we don't. And you find technology solutions that can help you with that. But also the app, the Cvent app, you're on Attendee Hub now. You can be on your phone with Attendee Hub, or you can be on your PC or your laptop. And the app can house just so much information now, whether it's the slides. I know there's been people asking, can I have these slides? We will see about that. But you can put those slides into your apps when you have sessions. You can put the agendas and schedules and surveys and contact sharing. There's just so much you can do within the Attendee Hub now. So just think, if you haven't gone paperless, now's really the time to do it. You have all the technology at your fingertips, literally at your fingertips, to be able to do that. Cool. Chris, did you want to add to anything?
Yeah, so one of the areas that we talk about so much, I know I'm sure you've talked about it as well internally with many of your team members, is badges, lanyards, and so on. And we wanted to give you a sense. This is absolutely not something that you need to memorize or anything like that. Just scan it with your eyes. The idea being that even if you're just working directly with Cvent, when you're thinking through something like badging, again, usually there's hundreds of them, right? You can start to ask some questions. And here's some examples of what, for example, we could offer. So you can ask things like, hey, is this approved from sustainable sources, this badge, for example? Is this fully recyclable? That's something that you can ask as well. And in some cases, you can also ask, is it biodegradable? And you can start to make decisions around which lanyards, which paper badges, and so on you want to choose. But the key thing is give yourself time. So if you need a badge printed tomorrow, it's unlikely to be from sustainable sources, fully recyclable, and possibly even biodegradable, at least the lanyard. Um, but if you can give yourself a little bit of time and really incorporate those sustainability pieces into your meeting planning process, you have a lot more options available to you. Of course, badges and lanyards are a very small part of your overall meeting planning process, but this is just to give you a little taste of what you can start to consider and what's out there, because we've made a lot of advances in areas of meetings technology and obviously just simple meetings items like this, like the badges.
Absolutely. And like Chris said, we put this on here just to give you that idea of, just how many options there are. And one of the, again, personal stories I wanted to share with you is at our recent summer networking, I personally went around and collected lots of people's lanyards and badges because I knew that we could send them back to the manufacturer, and they would turn them into something. So on one of those badge options, you would have seen it says if you collect them up and send them back, they'll turn them into cement. And that's just another way we can think about, recycling. Because I know you were talking earlier, Chris, about, three options you've got here. You either reduce it, you reuse it, or you recycle it. And that's, in amongst those options of, hey, is this recyclable? Well, maybe not, but maybe you can reuse your lanyards. Who knows? If there's we've got used to spraying things for COVID now, just to sanitize them again. So who knows? You can just get really creative with what will I do with this after my event? I don't always have to just throw it straight in the bin. And the other point I was making there was with companies like, I know in the UK, we have a company called Event Cycle. People need your stuff. You might not think it, but when you've run an event, if you're in touch with a company like that that says, hey, I'll just come and pick up the stuff you don't need and I will take it, I will find a house or a home for the event things that you don't need. It could be lanyards, it could be chairs. I know I went to an event recently where they were all sat on apple crates, because we were having these round apple crate discussions, not round table. And there was like, fake fires in the middle. And a charity really wanted that. And so Event Cycle came along, picked up all the apple crates and all the stuff in the middle and took it off to this charity who used that. I would have had the apple crates because I really would have wanted it for Connect, but I couldn't get them because they were already promised. But it just goes to show you just have to be a little bit creative about how you reuse things.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to call out there, and you alluded to it, but it's such an important piece, is we talk a lot about recycling, not just within the meetings industry, just overall as individuals as well. Oh, we're recycling, is that recyclable? Well, originally it was reduce. If you can't reduce, reuse. If you can't reuse, recycle. And so that's one of the things that I think is absolutely key for us to remember as well. And just as an example, I was at Reset Connect recently. And there, they really took that to heart. So, for example, to reduce, one of the things they did is they didn't put down any carpet, which to most meeting planners, in terms of with big exhibitions and so on, that was just, they didn't put down any carpet? No. And you know what? The only people who noticed were the meeting planners. Everyone else did not notice. So, they just reduced. So that's the first thing. And then in terms of reusing, obviously, some of the things that you've mentioned there is just saying like, okay, what can we reuse? I mean, if the lanyard is going to be 500 years in a landfill, I'm sure it can spend quite a bit more time around someone's neck as well. And then the recycle piece actually being kind of the last thing, because of course it uses energy, right? It takes energy to recycle. So we want to make sure that we're thinking through that reduce, reuse, recycle process, where recycle really is at the end.
Absolutely. I can see a question coming in, but I'm just going to do the reporting and then I'm going to come back to your question. Your question is about global initiatives with the landfill. I'll come right back to that. So finally, the final part on our little semicircle wheel here is about reporting and understanding what shall I do next, because that's what reporting really helps you to do. It helps you to kind of figure out, what was I tracking from my goals? Did I hit those things? Is it any good? What can I do to improve? And that's where the reporting comes in, because without looking back, you can't figure out what to do next. And Chris, I know that Cvent has a wealth of reports that our customers can look at. So why don't you talk us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a reminder, this is again one of those where we want to recognize the fact that it is an ecosystem of platforms, at least two. So for the Cvent reports, obviously you're going to have all of that information. Which meetings are you having? How many did you have? What type were they? And so on. And any sustainability initiatives that you're pushing broadly, you can start to track those. within meeting request forms and within meetings and so on. Obviously, attendee data and so on. So those reports are all available to you as you're collecting that information, just by virtue of meeting planners doing what they do every day. And then you can publish those to, for example, access portals to make them available to stakeholders and so on. The thing what you won't find in Cvent that you will need those third-party calculators for is the calculations piece. So taking all of that information and then actually calculating carbon emissions, there are people who have spent many years spending a lot of time trying to get those calculations as accurate as possible. So we definitely want to rely on their expertise. So organizations like ILA with the TRACE program, SAM, Thrust, Event Decision, and so on, who have spent their time on that. So feeding that data into those systems is also going to be an important part of the reporting. So it's part of a life cycle of a meeting. So first you have to get the data in, you've got to execute on the meeting, and then you're going to have the data that you need in order to understand where your emissions stand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to let you know what you can do next. So if you are in Europe and you want to hear more about this, we have 2 sessions coming up at Cvent Connect Europe in October. One is about tracking and one is about acting. And we are just trying to consider whether we do another workshop as well, because this topic is so important that we would love you to be able to really get into what do I do next. So if you're coming, please register for Cvent Connect Europe in person. If you're not in Europe or you can't make it, please go and register anyway, because as always, we're hybrid. And so you can watch it virtually. And if you are in Germany, we also have a watch party happening in Germany where we'll also be talking about these topics in German, so in your local language, which is amazing. We're doing it for the first time. So we're truly hybrid with our hub and spoke model. And we would love to just continue this conversation. I'm going to tackle that question. I'm going to see if there's any questions coming. If you haven't asked a question yet, please, I encourage you to do so because we are here to answer them for the next few minutes. So the question was, is the zero labels to landfill a global Cvent initiative or just American and Europe initiative? So for now, all I know, and I hate to be able to answer this question this way, but it's very, very local to Europe. I think North America is just trying to find the right suppliers, but don't quote me on that. I just know for a fact that we are able to do that here in London and in Europe. So Chris, do you know any more than I do?
I don't, but I do want to talk about a little bit how Cvent is tackling this as well, just more broadly. So we, as you know, one of the top organizations in this space, right, a top provider, we feel a responsibility both as an organization and to our clients. So we actually have teams working within Cvent who are doing both at the same time. So we're doing webinars like this to make sure that we're getting the word out about what you can do in the platform right now in order to start tracking your events, your sustainability initiatives, and so on. And at the same time, we're also working within Cvent to figure out, hey, how can we tackle this within the organization? You saw that we have a goal. Obviously, there are some very smart people who are thinking about, well, how do we do that in technology? How do we do that in our meetings, events, programs? And so on. So that's essentially how we're tackling it. Certainly something that would be interesting to hear from others, how other organizations are, but still a lot of work to be done. I don't think we need to, I think we need to be very transparent too and say, hey, most of us are at the start of the journey, right? And we have ways to go with this. But it's important to get one step foot in front of the other and to take those steps. And we're doing the same thing that you are right now.
Yeah, indeed. So next question. Can anyone recommend a good site for polyester badge holders? Now, this person said, very interested in badge options, and I knew you would be, which is why I put them on there. And I say that because it's one of the questions that gets asked the most of our team, of what can they do with their badging options. So I'm just going to go back a little bit here and just show you. You can see here with regards to lanyards, when they are made from polyester, they're actually not recyclable. So we would say maybe use source bamboo lanyards. Of course, it's always a choice, but the bamboo lanyards, as you can see here, are 100% biodegradable in soil, and you can read, we will try and see, and I know I'm working with our marketing team to see how much of this information we can share with you so that you're fully informed and you can make decisions based on the information that we have available to give to you. But if you want to source bamboo lanyards, we can definitely help you do that when you work with Cvent. Just trying to see if there's any more questions coming in. If not, actually, there is one. So it says recycling can be limited based on where your event takes place. What are some suggestions to tackle this? Chris, do you have any suggestions on recycling from events?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of them. So one of them is that what your recycling options are often are connected to what vendors you're using. So one of the things that's really interesting to think through is actually that as part of the meetings industry, most of our emissions that we're talking about here are scope 3 emissions, right? So there's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. And scope 3 emissions are essentially those that you influence but indirectly and that are actually done by someone else. So for example, the venue that you're partnering with. So one of the key things is definitely making sure that we are working with venues and making decisions on the front end in terms of to make sure that we are working with organizations that have strong recycling programs in place, among other things. But then there's the other thing, kind of go back and say recycling is just one aspect. So we've talked about it before, I won't harp on it, but that reduce, reuse, and recycle piece of it is, if recycling is something that is going to be difficult, how do you get ahead of that by reducing and reusing whenever possible so that recycling isn't needed?
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. I see one here that says, where do I start thinking about sustainability for my events program? And I'm trying to figure out when you say where, what do you mean? But I think it is again one of those. If I'm interpreting it right, it's one of those common questions of like, so where do I begin? And I think if I was to answer this, and then Chris, I'll pass this over to you, I would kind of say begin where you can. And what I mean by that is, what do you have influence over? What are you choosing and selecting that you can immediately say to your team, maybe if you're in your office, on your left and on your right, hey, we're about to find a venue for this next event. Why don't we find a sustainable venue? Like, why don't you just kind of start with what you can immediately influence? And in order to do that, write yourself a list of those things and then set goals against those things. It could be that small that you're like, typically, this is what we do. We have 5 events a year. Typically, we have this many people, this much food, this much travel, and just start to, you can almost do that on an Excel spreadsheet just by yourself if you weren't going to use any calculator software at all. And then start to set your team, hey, I've written this, why don't we go after this goal and just see if we can achieve that and find ways to have more vegan options or vegetarian options, or get people to bring water bottles to the event so you're not using plastic cups at your event, and just start really small, because I'm giving you advice from my own personal way of doing events. That's what I do. I just start with the small things. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And of course, it's the one that says, okay, I've heard this whole webinar. Now, what am I going to do? Well, actually, what I would say to you is you're not alone. Draw on the knowledge of your partners. So one of the things is the venues, actually. Most of the meetings you're hosting, unless they're very much internal, are likely to have a venue partner and possibly other vendor partners as well. And one of the things that you can do is you can turn to them and say, hey, we want to do this event a lot more sustainable. You host lots of events here. I know that you've got to have some ideas. What's your sustainability plan and how can we implement it? And you would be surprised because sustainability efforts have actually, on the hospitality cloud side, meaning the venues, hotels, and so on, they've made huge strides in that because it was fiscally the right thing to do as well. Obviously, environmentally as well. But hey, water use reduction, linen reuse programs, et cetera, those have really great impacts on hotels. So they've made great strides in that and can be an amazing partner. In addition to that, hey, I saw a question earlier that said, can we get connected to the sustainability team? Guess what? Your account team is your sustainability team. We are making efforts to make sure every account team is trained on what is possible in Cvent to make sure that they understand basic concepts of sustainability, just make sure we've got a baseline understanding across the organization and that they have an understanding of how to use Cvent and advise you on how to use Cvent to start, tracking those sustainability efforts and driving behavior at scale. So that would just be something else I'd encourage you to think about is, hey, I'm not alone. There are others that I work with because the sort of one of the key things about meetings is you never are alone. You've got your attendees, you have your vendors, you have your team members and other businesses, and you can draw on that as well.
Indeed. So we've got one final question that we're going to take before we wrap up. And you kind of touched on it just there. Maybe we just reiterate a few of the points, which was, how do we know if a venue is sustainable? What sorts of questions should we be asking? So I'll feed in, but I'm going to throw that one to you first, Chris, because maybe there are some key things that you would suggest that people are asking when they're trying to find their venues, sustainable venues.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things is looking at their certifications, right? So rather than you trying to come up with, oh no, what is a sustainable venue? If a venue is claiming to be sustainable, chances are 99% of them, if they're truly believable in sustainability, have a certification of some kind, or ideally multiple ones, right? So what you can ask then is, hey, I'd like to see your certification. And then, of course, what's possible is to see, well, how do you get the certification? What kind of certification is this, right? And that's going to give you much better insight than trying to just say like, oh, what should I ask about? Water use? Should I ask if the building is LEED certified? Is that the right thing? Should I ask if they have a recycling program? Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. There are certifying organizations that are doing that work on your behalf and making sure that people are making valid statements about the level of sustainability within their venues. And you can use that, I think, as a key tool to feel confident that you're making decisions that make sense.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that, I mean, I'll say a couple of things to that. So I was challenging my team, like I said, what are we doing? What are we doing? And we kind of recognized that a lot of the venues that we're working with already have a lot of those either certifications or policies in place. And we just went back and looked at, well, what are they? And we use that as kind of like our benchmark for ourselves. And I would say that's one of my encouragements to you of the, where do I start? Don't think that you're not already doing it. Sometimes you're doing it by proxy through the vendors that you've already chosen to work with and through the venues you've already chosen to work with. You just need to go back and look in and see what their policies actually are. And then you can give yourself a pat on the back and think, right, I'm not in no man's land. I have done something. But the second thing to that is if you are based in Europe or even if you're in the States, I again, I think for everyone that's tuning in from either the US or if you're coming from the rest of the world across maybe Asia, we might do some groundwork. I think I'm going to go and find out what your sister organizations are to the one I'm about to mention. But in the UK, there's something called the B Corp certification. And to be a B Corp, all I know is that it's really difficult. It's very challenging for venues to become B Corps. They have to look at all of their policies, not just green and sustainable policies from a green perspective, but diversity and inclusion, social impact. They really have to do quite a lot of work around well-being and mental health of not only their staff, but their attendees and the guests that are coming to the venues. And it's really hard work. And so anyone that's a certified B Corp is almost like gold star right now of venue when it comes to sustainable measures. But there are lots of them. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, there are DICE accreditations you can get for diversity. There's so many. And so like Chris said, it's looking into those. If you like those standards and you think they hold up against your own policies, you can then start to use some of those existing standards to challenge your other suppliers and say, well, are you DICE certified? And are you a B Corp? And are you trying to become a B Corp? Or are you anywhere near it? Because they don't have to be fully certified, but sometimes they can show you what they're doing to strive towards that higher certification as well, because we're all on this journey together ultimately. So can't just go ruling out venues, but at least they need to show what journey they're on. And does that align with yours as well? Because that will also be a good way to choose. Fantastic. Chris, have you got any final words?
I think just generally, it's great that, frankly, you took a step by attending this webinar. So that is already something that you can pat yourself on the back for. And in terms of just starting with your meetings and events, it's getting out there, it's communicating your desire to do this, setting yourself some goals. Those can be very achievable, small goals that lead towards something bigger. The key is really just getting started somewhere.
Absolutely. So thanks, Chris. I want to tell you all what's coming up next in our series of webinars. This is not the only one. Like I said, you can come along to Cvent Connect Europe and you can watch those sessions live, or you can tune in and watch them virtually, but that's in October. Still coming up in August, we've got Bring Back Your In-Person Events with Cvent Exchange. We have Cvent's platform tour, Start Anywhere, Grow Everywhere. And what we mean by that is you can start with Cvent absolutely anywhere. You can take one thing and say, you know what, I'm just going to do some reg, or actually I need a mobile app. But there's so much more you can do with Cvent. So don't forget to tune into that webinar and we'll show you how you can grow everywhere with Cvent. And finally, on the 30th of August, Prepared for Anything. We all need to be in this climate. How to set up your event program to weather any storm. And boy, aren't there some storms right now. So we really want to talk you through what you can do to be agile and flexible within your event program. So stay tuned for those webinars as well. Just go to our resources page or our event section on our website and you can sign up for any one of those webinars. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. Please don't forget to fill in the survey, which is coming up. You'll see it, and it's one of the buttons on your screen. We really want to hear your feedback. It's either, like it says with this arrow, God knows which way I'm pointing now. And if you're on your phone, it's down at the bottom. We want to hear your feedback because we want to know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and what you want to hear about next. You can feedback on us as speakers because we could be absolutely rubbish and we just don't know it, but we'd like to hear from you. So stay tuned and I'll keep doing that. And go to our website and absolutely find out all our resources. And we're going to send you different bits and pieces from this webinar today. You might not get the whole deck, but we'll send you the slides that we absolutely can send out and we can share. But thank you so much for joining. Thanks, Chris.